I think these days are incredibly valuable to the industry, but also to the training providers in this audience, and there's quite a few of us, as well as the learning and development professionals, because we are literally trying to understand what our new environment now looks like. So our last topic for the day is shining the light on training and competency in our modern electricity supply industry. I think historically we all had a reasonably good idea of what training looked like as a contributor to safety culture and as a pathway to workforce competency. But our modern environment is presenting us with a lot more challenges. A lot more challenges to create impactful training, not just training, but training that actually gives us results, that gives you bang for your buck, that gives you value as an individual learner. So trying to frame this up, what does our modern environment look like? And when I scan the audience, I've come up with, I think, at least 4, I call them global mega trends that are impacting our environment. As I said, I came up with 4. First of all, there is the energy transition. So we're building transmission towers, we're strengthening our grid, we're building and energising renewable generators. The next one is electrification. Think electrical vehicles, think rail infrastructure, think ports and the ship-to-shore revolution that we're about to see for high voltage charging that will remove diesel from our ports. The next one is digitisation. There's quite a few people in this audience that are creating gigawatts of storage in their large and growing portfolios of data centres. That was unthinkable 10, 15 years ago. The final, I think, global megatrend that we're dealing with is outsourcing. In the past, asset owners would self-perform a lot of their work. Now they outsource construction, they outsource operations, they outsource maintenance. It's not just to contractors, it's contractors, subcontractors, and their subcontractors. So all of this is creating quite a new environment for us to deal with. One of the most obvious ones is a critical shortage of workforce. We all want skilled electrical workers. The next one is that we're dealing with a myriad of rapidly developing and emerging technologies. Renewable generation, connecting to the grid, controlling it. These are unprecedented technologies and we're rolling them out at massive scale. High turnover. I think we're all victims of having staff turnovers that are way higher than we saw a decade ago. Our workforce is highly mobile. People don't expect to stay in the same job for the decades that our fathers and our fathers' fathers used to. Tight budgets. We're all struggling with tight budgets and probably very tight timetables to get projects done. And it's often hard to convince our managers that training is a valuable asset to invest in. And we have an ageing workforce. There is what I would call a hollowing out of our industry as people reach that golden 55 plus age and start thinking about dusting off their golf clubs and finding their fishing rods. And I'm going to head over to my co-host now, because the traditional training and approaches that we had to train people now need to develop and evolve to meet all of these global challenges.
So I think we need to sort of reconsider the way in which we're thinking about training and development in high-risk, high-consequence environments. What we've done in the past is have a very top-down approach. We set standards, we set regulations, and it drifts down to the learners. and we follow a pathway of learning, a structured pathway of learning. That model, because of all the issues that Lisa's talked about, has changed dramatically, where the value, if you like, has shifted more towards the learner. And we've heard, I think today, throughout the day, the challenges we're facing with learners more generally are what constitutes competence, and we'll hear from that from our speakers today. What constitutes competence? How do we know that people are competent in their operational context? So what we've decided to do is perhaps take a slightly different perspective and look at the challenges and drill down through those challenges from the perspective, first of all, of the individual learner. Start off with the individual learner. What are the challenges that our learners are facing now as they begin their journey through the industry? And then we're going to take a slightly different perspective, an organisational perspective, and have a look at the organisational requirements. And then finally, we're going to have a look at the industry requirements. So these three different perspectives and the challenges, we're going to see if there are synergies across the three environments. But I wanted to take a leaf out of Gareth's presentation, actually, and talk about this as something of a system. And Gareth, I think, mentioned that training is one of those Jenga blocks or those defences. It's become an incredibly important part of the defence in high-risk, high-consequence environments like electricity safety. And if you think about it from the model that I've got here, the industry sets the regulations or the requirements, whether that's regulatory or competency-based. But then within that, there are organisational needs. And beneath that are individual learners, and they are individual learners, and they are going to behave differently, and they're going to learn differently. And where once upon a time we could have probably said, let's just use a standardised, one-size-fits-all approach to learning, and those people who don't pass can just leave and will retain the best of the best for the industry, we may not be able to do that anymore. We might have to modify not our approaches to training. We don't modify the individuals, we modify our approaches to training to suit those individual needs, so that the individual needs match the learning outcomes that we need for our organisations and our industry. So to take us along this bit of a journey from the individual and the organisational and the industry perspective, I'm going to ask Graham, first of all, to take us through the perspective from the individual learner. Thanks, Graham.
Okay. Good afternoon. All hear me okay? Yeah? Yeah. Lovely.
Very loudly and clearly.
Thank you very much. Enough. I give this quite a bit of thought, really, because I can give you my opinion, and as with everybody in the room, we've all been on training courses, so we kind of have an idea of what we expect from them, unless it's the first time you've been on that type of course. I'm sort of responsible for around about 3,300 people a year on safe systems of work electrical courses. So I thought, rather than give you my opinion, I'd speak to some of the feedback that I get. So some of this throughout the course, and then of course we always have the feedback sheets at the end of it, and with there being 3,300, I read them all, obviously. However, you might be surprised at what the main themes are. So I could give you lots of individual sort of feedback topics, but the main themes don't vary that much. And they're not as complicated as you might think. So the first thing, to get the feedback throughout the course, engagement is quite crucial. So we have to try and engage the audience as such. I would struggle here. I normally teach people in a classroom of about 8 to 12 people. So this is a little bit outside my comfort zone. So I'm just going to speak it as I know. One of the questions we get on the course, one of the first questions is, why am I here? Now, I heard somebody mention the shoulds, the woulds, and so on. Is that kind of way? They should understand why they're there, but they don't always. Now, if I'm teaching, for example, APs, SAPs, they know why they're there. They know they've got a compliance arrangement to sort out. They know what the bosses expect of them. Very often, the delegate that comes on our courses has been sent and doesn't know why they're there. So we have to get that engagement fairly quickly so we can explain why they're there. This kind of speaks towards the, well, what am I trying to get out of the course? That might come as part of that conversation. Once you've explained all that, we've kind of got a bit of an agreement, a verbal contract, they may well ask, well, what do I get at the end? So we can then talk about the kind of certificate they may get. The next question that would prompt is it accredited? So even that person that doesn't actually know what they're going there for still wants something at the end of it, a certificate, but not just a paper off the training provider, but actually something from a training provider that is assured or accredited. So they understand that that has then a value in the marketplace for them. There was one question that really is a bit of a struggle, because we have to now start drawing back to basics, is, so at the end of this course, for example, it's an AP course. At the end of the course, am I an AP? Does this course make me competent with a 5-day course? And then we have to explain, no, you are not an AP. Competence training is a big part of it. We can train towards competence, as we've already sort of mentioned. But training doesn't make you competent. We need knowledge, we need familiarity. We might need some other skills, all depending on what it is that we're doing back at work. So we then have to explain that when they go back to work, their employer may well be expecting them to do a particular job because they've been on a course. Now they need a conversation with their employer. So we have to make that clear, that training leads towards competence, perhaps, and is a big part of it, not necessarily make you competent. The HSC make it really clear that it is unlikely that a training course would provide competence. They've said that in quite a few of their publications. What next for me comes up within the context of the course as well. We're doing this, I think I'm liking it, I think I'm going to pass at the end of the week. What other courses do you do? In other words, how can I develop and progress? So we have to be able to point them in the right direction, perhaps, or hopefully point them in the right direction. But we also need to make sure that we understand where they may be going, so that we can point them in the right direction with some kind of credibility. So the other thing is, or the main thing, and this might be a bit of a surprise, on our feedback sheets, we always get things like the trainer was good. Hopefully we don't get very often when it says the trainer wasn't so good, but the trainer was good, the course was good, and so on. The main theme behind the feedback is their experience on the course. So what I'm talking about there is the most common feedback topic is the food, what food they got on the course. Another one is what the classroom was like, how friendly the staff were, that kind of thing, what the hotel was like. All this tells me, because we sometimes read these things, and as a technical person, I'm looking for technical type of feedback. That is always on the feedback sheets, what their experience was like. So we have to address that and make sure that they go away with a positive experience. And hopefully, I think I've got a... We should have, or what I've been talking about, should have addressed these kind of things. So the understanding the learning requirements, it's often one of the first questions asked. When we start our courses, they're usually a maximum of a week long, so we don't have long to get to know these people, so we do need to get a rapport going as soon as possible. And that is one of the things that they will ask. Assessing opportunities for learning. Why am I here? We get that question so many times, not from the current APs and SAPs, but more from the beginners. So you are getting an opportunity for learning, and then we'll talk about the rest of the opportunities they might get throughout the week. Identifying areas for development, I think I've mentioned. Satisfying learning objectives. They very often do have learning objectives for their development, but that particular week we can deal with that by saying at the end of the week we've got exams, for example, and you can then meet the criteria that then takes you to the next objective. Outcomes and competence, I think I've explained that we have to often explain that competence isn't just training. We understand that we are training towards competence, but it isn't just about training. Record the learning. They want that certificate. That's part of their record. They do want it assured or accredited by some kind of recognised body, the City and Guilds, people like that. So they've got that recorded. We often talk to them about maybe recording it as part of their CPD or personal logbooks and that kind of thing. But they definitely want it recorded and acknowledged, basically. And I think next, I'll hand it back. So my colleague is going to talk about more from the employer's viewpoint. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk to you for the next couple of minutes about the organisational perspective of training and the challenges. So, from employers, what do you think are the challenges in managing learning and the development of workers? Unfortunately, I'm stuck between the learner and what industry wants, so I've got the rough diamond here. So, employers, we need to identify the skills required for roles and responsibilities. That's meeting with industry, meeting with the person, and often meeting with our customer's environment and the terms of contract. Particularly with electrical safety, often that is an authorised person, inspectors and testers, or even new technologies coming in, solar, EV, things like that. We need to make sure we've got the right people. So to do that, we need to establish the skills and the capabilities of the people that we already have, and new people come through the doors. Technology is moving very fast, the industry is growing rapidly, and a lot of employers out there have an issue with the amount of people that they have currently on their books and the amount of people that they're going to bring through, and that includes supply chain as well. So it is quite critical that we establish the skills that we do need and the capabilities of the people moving forward. I'm quite fortunate. I work for a construction company, Balfour, Beatty, who cover everything from small jobs right up to mega projects and different complexities. So we often act as a principal contractor, sometimes customer, and sometimes we are the supply chain. So it's very different variants of how we act as an organisation, what we need to bring to the party and how we need to satisfy the contract as well. So it's integrating, determining the training needs and learning needs. So for each contract, each customer, or if we are the customer, we need to determine what we actually need, if it's authorised persons, inspectors, different technologies. It's a massive subject, and it's one that's often overlooked, and sometimes we just go for the minimum, whereas we should be looking at what exactly we do need and how we enhance that to not only upskill our own people, but upskill for the future as well, and getting the right people in there. Then we integrate the technical and non-technical learning. Easier said than done. Specifically for this conference, electrical safety, APs is probably the big theme for that part as well. So how do we get non-technical learning across to authorised persons? Because they're used to throwing switches, making safety from the system to persons and plant in there as well. So it's quite a challenge. So part of doing that, we have set up our own training school in the centre of Scotland that we've engaged with a lot of our customers and framework partners. And how do we accomplish now? We had to get the foundations and the most common themes from all our customers and bring them into one. Then we set the foundation for training, and it gives our APs, subcontractors, even our customers when they come along to these training sessions, gives them a good footing. Then we can move forward onto the enhanced skills specific for that contract or project. Reducing the cost of learning and development. Until the COVID times, everything, or most of the time, it was face-to-face learning, which is good because you can interact with people, you can see the whites of people's eyes, you can, as a trainer, as an organisation, you can see that the people are taking in what you're saying. Now, as Lisa said, costs are a big thing. E-learning is probably more common now than face-to-face, and it's making sure that we still get the outcome and desires to make sure that people are on the road to being competent through e-learning and training. But where we do need to still do face-to-face, it's important that we do that and we don't shun it away to e-learning, which is important, but we do need to make sure that the people are on the right footing. And we improve the efficiency and effectiveness of learning. How do we do that as well? So, as I said, face-to-face training is always good, and it might deliver the best outcomes to do that. I think it would be impossible to do an AP training course over e-learning. It might give you a prerequisite to come on that course, but it wouldn't make you on the road to an authorised person. But as I said, the prerequisites, within my organisation, you have to be up to the most recent edition of the IET wiring regs. that is now available as e-learning, and the exams can be done remote. That would then allow you to come in and train to be an authorised person face-to-face. So it is quite a broad subject, and one that's, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all for an organisation, because we need to listen to industry, we need to listen to the individuals, and we need to listen to contracts as well. So that's really kind of broadly it for me, how we achieve that, is listening to the people and listening to industry and making sure we get the best possible outcomes for training from an organisational point of view. So is that back to, it's over to you now, Allan, I believe.
Don't know.
That's great. Can everybody hear me okay, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. The microphone's on, which is always a good start. We've seen today from just about the majority of the presentations that when it comes to the combination of health and safety and operational best practice, there's often a little bit of a clash there. What you often find is that companies are looking for the most cost-effective manner in which to get their staff trained in order to tick the box. That was mentioned a little bit earlier on as well. But the reality is somewhat different, of course, as most of the HSE people in this room will recognise. Health and safety, certainly from an electrical perspective, is immeasurable. What I mean by that is that we don't know exactly how many electrical incidents we've actually managed to prevent by putting in control measures such as procedures, training, and obviously competence assessment and training for the staff. So there's a lot of different aspects to the side of industry as a whole. And it's a very broad subject as well, because of course we're taking in not just the utilities, the DNOs of the world, where the training of their staff is usually quite thorough and quite lengthy as well, to the kind of companies that the likes of ABB work for. I'm the Global Electrical Safety Manager for ABB, and we try to do training right around the world. So you can imagine there, when you're trying to deliver a consistent electrical safety message, there are a number of different factors that need to be considered. First of all, the legislation that we spoke about a little bit earlier. In America, you've got your NFPA 70E documentation, and of course we've got the EN 5110 type regulations here in Europe. But then you also need to add into the mix all of those local legal requirements that countries have above and beyond what the international standards are requiring of them. So that's just one aspect of how we deal with trying to get a consistent message across. The other thing, of course, is that we have an awful lot of different languages to overcome. And certainly within ABB, it's been a challenge for us to actually provide our staff with documentation and procedures in 19 different languages. And that in itself is a bit of a challenge, and having to pass that documentation through to people in each respective country to have it checked grammarly to make sure that it actually makes sense. Because in English, I can put a procedure together, it makes perfect sense to me, but as I've found with one or two of my German colleagues, there are times where that language just does not relate and it comes out with something completely different. So that's one aspect of things. Now you take that and put it into a training presentation, and you've also got a similar problem. And a lot of countries around the world will not adopt the training that you are trying to have delivered to them if it is not in their specific language. And that is another challenge that we've had to overcome within ABB, and we've actually had to bring in translators so that we can deliver in English, they can translate it into the local language. So they're just a couple of aspects from an industry point of view as to how we try to get that competence management out there. The other thing is, in ABB, we introduced a competence management program, and those of you who were in the Scamware conference last year, you would have heard me talk about that, so I'll not labour on it. But effectively, that competence management program was designed to ensure that we had the right people with the right skills undertaking the work that they have been trained and have experience in. And of course, we mentioned a little earlier there about what makes a person competent. And it isn't just about the training. As we found out during the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns, our company, like many other big industrial companies, moved everything online. They saw e-learning as the way forward, an opportunity to train all their staff in simple electrical basic fundamental principles. But the problem was that the e-learning, as we later found out, was not quite as effective as you might think, because we did a follow-up exercise asking some of those people who had undertaken our more involved training courses, such as person in charge of work training, what do you remember from that course content? Without giving them any clues as to what was in the course. What do you specifically remember as the takeaways from that particular training course? And most people could not recollect most people could not recollect more than 10% of the course content, simply because it was one of those situations where you set somebody away on a course online, they go away, have a cup of tea, come back, press the button again. There was no time limit on it. So there was no reason for them to just go off, wander, do whatever they did, and come back to it and complete the course. Now, from the company's perspective, that's a tick in the box exercise. Great, now we've got thousands of people through on e-learning. But does that e-learning correlate to a competent person? And the reality is that no, it doesn't. And as we said earlier, training is only one element of what makes a person competent. The latest electrical safety training courses that we're doing in ABB are now what we call fully assessed courses. And what that basically means is there is a theoretical element and there is a practical hands-on training element as well. And the candidates who come on that course are told right from the offset that you are going to be assessed from the moment you come into the classroom to the moment you leave the course in 2 days' time. And we are looking at the behaviours of the individuals who are actually on the course. From the point of view that when you are stood here presenting the content to these people, you can see exactly how many of them are sitting playing with their mobile phones, not paying any attention, or they're sitting chatting to their friends, or they've got their laptop out and they're rattling away on the laptop. So they are being assessed on that aspect alone. That is a behaviour that you'll find quite common in a lot of training courses, and I'm pretty sure you've seen plenty of that yourself as well. And it's this situation where we have people who do not take in all of the knowledge that they're trying to, or we are trying to get them to accrue. And in reality, when we've then gone out to site and visited some of these people who have taken on quite responsible roles as a person in charge of work, we have found that some of the approaches that they have to electrical safety are questionable, to say the least. Now, of course, the other side of the coin is the person in charge of work takes that additional responsibility on site. There are people who, what you would call, are natural leaders. They do not mind taking on that additional responsibility, and in some cases, they're actually quite keen to get involved in that process, which is no bad thing. But what you also need to do is temper that against the work that they are actually doing. And what I mean by that is you can have people who are perhaps a little more over-exuberant than others, who think they know everything and are the kind of people who like to take control of a situation. They are the ones that you need to watch for. And on the other side of the coin, we had mention of a young guy just over to my right, your left, who has made it to being a senior authorised person at a very young age. You have people like that who are quite unique and have the ability and the aptitude. We've had aptitude mentioned a few times today as well. It's having the right attitude and aptitude to controlling and managing and communicating, more importantly, with the people that they have on their team. And it isn't suited to everybody. And this was a big issue that we had in ABB, in that most of the managers wanted to have everybody as a person in charge of work, assessed and authorised to be a person in charge of work. So we had to say to them, whoa, 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 not everybody is suited to that particular role, because they need to be a good and clear communicator. They also need to be able to stand in front of a crowd of people and brief them on a day-to-day basis. They also need to be the interface between the customer and ABB. So there are a lot of different attributes associated with that, what we call the soft skills associated with that particular role. And of course, not everybody wants to be in that front line. So the simple question is that you ask people, well, do you want to be a person in charge of work? Are you okay taking on that additional responsibility? And it's surprising how many people came back and said, well, no, actually. I'd much rather just be a part of the workforce and let somebody else take the control and I'll just do what I'm told. And that suits a high percentage of people. Now, just moving on a little bit, when we're talking about the service people in our teams in ABB, and Joby talked about that a little bit earlier on today, we have our field service staff going out to many, many different customers and are faced with many differing work environments on a day-to-day basis. But even within our own production facilities, what we find is that when you get to a customer site, or even in one of our facilities, the actual electrical infrastructure, the equipment, the switchgear that provides the energy to the production processes is often found to be up to 45, 50 years old. We even found some, and Chris will attest to this, in one of our facilities in Germany, where the equipment was 60 years old and was obsolete. So if that actual equipment ever operated under fault, there is a high likelihood they would not be able to get that switch back on again. And it's all about the preventative maintenance aspect of things. But more importantly, the people that we bring in to actually maintain that equipment, not just on ABB facilities, but also on our customers' sites as well. And a lot of it all goes back to the starting point, which, surprise, surprise, is the single line diagram. How many customer sites do you know of, might even be your own site? Have you got an up-to-date single line diagram that actually shows how everything is interconnected? And that is the starting point for any work that our field service engineers have to carry out. It's having that information available. And on a number of the sites that we visited, we found that in one switch room was a nice single line diagram dated 1983. And then you went into another switch room for the MV switchgear, and here's a similar diagram dated 1987 that somebody had scratched on some additional production line equipment. Which one's right? 1987 is obviously going to be the bet. But 1987, it's 2024. And if somebody scratched on the updated single line diagram, how many other pieces of equipment have been added in or taken out that haven't been recorded? So simple little things like that can make a big difference when it comes to actually carrying out any maintenance on the switchgear from HV right down to LV that you might have in your premises. And then, of course, you've got to be able to train the staff in order to try to anticipate the kind of issues they're likely to come across when they do go to a customer site. And then you add in things like the potential for vermin, dust, dirt to collect within the switchgear. How many switch rooms are used as storage rooms? Because it's just a piece of switchgear that sits in the corner of the room. Nobody ever bothers to go in. Nobody bothers to touch it. But there's a nice bit of space there, and you can just shove all sorts of rubbish in there. It's all thick of dust. Nobody ever goes in. And more importantly, nobody ever goes in to maintain it, more importantly. So there's all these kind of factors you need to think about when you're talking about the industry as a whole. And that is because industry is varied from one location to the other. You might go to one site, everything is pristine and clean and beautifully set up, it's well lit, it's well ventilated. You go to the next site and it's a case of how do I get in? You know, the door's hanging off, the lighting doesn't work. And more importantly, how old is that piece of equipment, and have you got the maintenance records for that piece of kit? And 9 times out of 10, the answer will be, no, we haven't got anything at all. So that, when you put it together in the big picture of things, comes back to planning. Planning is key to everything. And if you get the planning right, if you get the communication right, if you get the technical competencies of the people and their understanding of the system and their ability to question things, then hopefully you'll have a workforce who can work without incident. But it's not always that clear-cut, unfortunately. And with that, I'd like to hand back to yourself, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Craig. We've heard a great deal about the challenges, and so we're going to hear a little bit now just about some of the potential solutions to the requirements for training. So we've separated this into 3 elements. First of all, approaches. So the approaches we take to training. And these are the broad issues. And you heard from Graham, Craig and Allan about the different approaches to training. And these are broad issues. So we need to have a learner-centred approach. So if you think about the learner-centred approach, this was the old traditional apprenticeship model. It was a learner-centred approach. You know, your mentor, your trainer would take different approaches to teaching you as an apprentice. And so technology is potentially allowing us to move to a more centred approach. But it needs to also be accurate. And I think you heard Allan there talking about the fact that we need to have accurate line diagrams, we have to accurate training. It needs to be timely. So there's a new approach where training perhaps needn't occur all at once because, as we heard from Graham, information can be forgotten. And Craig's mentioned the same thing. Information can be forgotten if they're trained. If everything's trained in one go, perhaps we can do some sort of module training. Is training relevant? We're training the right skills at the right time for the right individuals. Is it evidence-based? Do we see improvements? We mentioned the issue of e-learning versus face-to-face learning and whether there are differences there. And finally, is it cost-effective? So there are approaches to training. We can also look at tools. So we have a lot of tools available to us to assist us with training, and with advanced technology, these tools can be very capable, but they need to be flexible. So we need to have an approach where we use the tools to create a flexible approach to training. They need to be adaptive so that we can change the dimensions or the information for different nations, for different jurisdictions, etc. They need to be modular. So increasingly we're seeing in learning and development a transition from large-scale learning over an extended period of time to modular training, and that seems to fit in better with people's time-constrained environments. They need to be practical, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Accessible, e-learning obviously has made things more accessible for people. And then scaffolded, so that I'm not not teaching me stuff that I already know. You're teaching me the stuff that's actually going to extend my capabilities. And then finally, we can look at the outcomes. And the argument is that if we use the appropriate approaches together with the appropriate tools, it yields the appropriate outcomes. And the outcomes we're looking for are standardised outcomes, that we can be confident that someone can undertake the task that we've asked them to undertake, that they're transferable. And this is a big issue today across jurisdictions where we want skills and credentials, and you heard them from our speakers as well, that there are, even the learners want tickets that are transferable, that they can go from one organisation to another or one jurisdiction to another. And finally, there's this notion of adaptive, so that we can adapt the learning outcomes to suit new technologies. And I mean new technologies and new electricity technologies. So there are requirements for the end point, but there's no easy solution, unfortunately, to training and development and training and competence more generally. What I'll do now is just give you a brief overview of what's happening in the literature at the moment or in the latest developments and where we're heading. So there's this notion of just-in-time training, and it's a bit of a risk for high-consequence environments, but it's the idea that you're trained just in time to do the task. So you can have a think about that. There are some jurisdictions, some medical environments that are using this just-in-time training. The idea is that you are being trained and you can apply and practice the skills. The idea of evidence-based training comes from the aviation industry. So the aviation industry, as many of you may know, there's a requirement for recurrent training. Every 3 months, pilots go into a flight simulator, particularly commercial pilots, and have to be retrained. There was this idea that, simulation, there's costs of simulation, there's opportunity costs of getting pilots out of the cockpit into simulation, and this tends to be a significant cost. So the aviation industry has moved towards what's called evidence-based training, that is, training those things that are critical. So instead of training pilots or testing whether pilots can land or take off, they're testing unusual events, things that might not occur, things like engine failures, etc., a medical episode in the cabin, something like that. Again, it's a new idea, but it's something to consider. Micro-credentials are becoming more the norm, particularly, and some of you may be doing micro-credentials at the moment, particularly in sort of business programs. These are small suites of programs where we complete a credential, but it scaffolds towards a larger credential. Adaptive learning and AI, of course, we're now all using ChatGPT, and so are our students using ChatGPT, and the idea of AI to adapt the learning to my needs. So ChatGPT is an adaptive learning suite, in the sense that we will ask a question and it will try and answer the question the best way it can. It might even learn something about us and know that we have to have a visual image rather than a verbal image to explain the relationship. But there's that notion of adaptive learning. We've heard a little bit about immersive learning and virtual reality. So there's two different types of immersive learning. There's the face-to-face engagement in a full simulation, which you may have seen and we've seen today, and then there's virtual learning. And now we've also got augmented reality as well. So this is the idea that we are visually seeing the environment as it is, but overlaid there's information that tells us about things that are hazardous, etc. But it becomes a learning environment. There's in-house versus third-party, and Lisa talked about the idea of, do we have our own in-house suite, which is very costly, or do we move towards third-party training delivery? The integration of existing and emerging standards. So I know that there's a move afoot in the electricity industry to create generalised standards, which I think is very, very useful. But setting those standards is only one part of the goal. The goal then is to translate that down into training and development. Learner-centred approaches we've talked about, and the integration of technical and non-technical skills, that's the human factors skills, integrated with technical skills, are further developments that are occurring at the moment. However, what I just wanted to leave you with before I hand it back over to Lisa is what we know works in training and development. There are some truisms that we know that actually work in training and development. They haven't changed over many, many years. And that is, first of all, the effectiveness of technology depends on its implementation. We've all been enamoured by VR and AR, and I am too. I love the technologies. But they only work in particular environments, and they work when you have the right learning approach. And I think Gareth talked about the idea of a learning culture. The idea of a learning culture inspires everyone to learn. And so we actually find that these adaptive technologies and these new technologies are more effective when there is a structured learning environment. Learners benefit differently depending upon a range of individual factors. So some learners are motivated to learn, some learners are very keen on a particular topic, some are fatigued, some are dealing with young families, and there are all sorts of reasons why learning is successful or not, as the case may be. We do know that active engagement and practice are critical for learning. So active engagement, actually getting to do the task, has always been more effective than watching someone do it. So getting them out there and actually doing a task is much more effective. We also know that timely feedback, over the many years we've been doing research, we know that timely feedback is one of the most effective means of improving performance. And finally, learners need to want to learn. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Lisa again, who will close the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think one of the key themes out of our panel today is that we need to make training as a concept work harder. So we need to be more analytical about what it is that we're trying to achieve and take our learnings from the past, but also consider what we need to do in our new environment. And I think that the ideas of micro-credentials, just-in-time training, using technology wisely, not just using VR because it sounds cool, but using it if it actually achieves a result and understand what we're looking for. I think we've just... I'm going to open it just to the Slido. Have we got Slido happening? Can do to capitalise. Yes, that is the key question. Unless anyone has questions specifically for any of our panel members.
Questions have come through, but we answer these. Questions have come through, but we answer this.
I think we'll do the Slido first. Thank you. No? Use VR, standardised. Actually, can I, just on the standardised, again, a question to the audience, because I know a number of people are involved in industry committees that are trying to address some standard training and competency assessments for the wind industry. I've been involved in a few of those working groups. And if anyone can talk to what they think a standard could look like, because certainly from training providers' perspective, we would love to see a more defined standard that would give training providers a good guidance as to what we should be providing to learners across even multiple countries. Let me see, I'm looking for someone in the industry that's been involved in these committees. There's someone over there? If you're saying, is it achievable to create multi-country?
Yeah, not to be a pessimist on it, but you know, we look at ATEX training that's generally rolled out across UK, Ireland, most European nations. Australia have their own standards, Northern America have their own take on it. So we do have governing bodies like ATEX trying to do a global standardised approach, but still coming up with roadblocks. So not to try to be a full pessimist, and again, coming from a UK Pacific viewpoint, we do have very standardised training when it comes to electrical apprenticeships. The industries like JTL, etc., have those training paths and training matrices very set out, so we can define what competency looks like through theoretical and practical training and assessment combined with on-site experience.
So I'll have a crack at answering the question from well, I'm going to talk high voltage operator training, and I'm interested in comments once I've had a go at it. I personally think that it is possible to create a standard. If I put a bunch of senior authorised persons in the room, they will be able to identify what the foundation or fundamentals you need to be aware of to switch safely, to understand how to issue a permit, sign on your work party, isolate, restore. There are a series of fundamentals that are consistent across any country. So I think that a training standard can be created that sets that up. I think training providers need to be aware that if they offer that in a different country, then they have to be cognizant of the electrical and work health and safety regulations. And they might also have to be cognizant of the training certification that exists in that country. And I'll give you an example is the Netherlands. So we at RelyOn Nutec have just acquired a high voltage, low voltage ATEX training business in the Netherlands. Now, the foundation training that they offer across those pathways are the same as what you would expect to see here in the UK or in Australia. But they also have a national assessment tool, which is called STIPL. So you have to be assessed to be instructed or a HV operator. So the training needs to be able to set you up to pass that national assessment instrument. But it actually still doesn't change the foundation standard that you would expect to see here as an SAP.
Most of what you're saying, and not disagree, in fact, if you look like a more mature organisation like the ATEC qualification routes, what's the
Bridging routes to bring in Northern America along with Australia, so that we're all pretty much singing off the same hymn sheet and we're not looking at our own jurisdiction routes in training and qualification recognition programs. So that was predominantly the question. It's not impossible.
Yep.
Everything is there. What's the routes to bridge those commonalities between continents?
My only response to you is it has to be via collaboration. We have to get that's where we're talking about the large companies and broadly industry need to have some recognition that there is a commonality and some acceptance that one training certificate is acceptable compared to another training certificate. But I mean, my call to industry is that if you want to be more efficient and effective with training, if you want to be more efficient with your ability to mobilise and move people across multiple projects, then there needs to be some more recognition of those issues.
How do you deal with the global standardization?
Sorry not to be negative, but every DNO in this room have different electrical safety rules and different requirements. So yes, you can have a standard in the basics of writing permits, but even permits are called different things in different companies. The chances of getting all of those DNOs and National Grid to agree to a set of authorisations, to a set of training, is frankly a pipe dream. It is not going to happen.
Completely agree with you. And I deal with DNOs and TNOs or transmission and distribution network operators every day. I understand that your permits are different. I understand that your electrical safety rules differ across different networks, across different countries. But I'm still suggesting that your baseline concepts around electrical safety rules, around what a permit looks like, around what a sanction for tests means, around what a single line diagram is required, I think those things are still standard concepts that can be implemented as a basic training program. I think that once that person is trained by a third-party provider, sure, you need to be authorised as competent in your safety rules or your safety rules. But that's only at least allowing a small amount of work for you to do, which should enable you to be able to recruit and upskill people more quickly and more efficiently.
With respect, with regards to that, I don't think that's the baseline. That's not where this industry starts. The issue is that, as the gentleman implied, when you get to that level, there's lots of control measures in place, and you've already attained a reasonable amount of proficiency in what you're doing. What our whole industry is dependent on is new people to the industry at a young age, and they are not getting delivered the same standard of training in any way, shape, or form. So what we're doing is we're looking at where we are within this industry, and we're taking that as benchmark that we want to talk about. It's simply not the case. We have courses for 6 weeks, we have courses for 6 days, we have courses for 2 years. For dinosaurs like me, who went through a CITB, ABC, 2, 3, 9, all everything else to work with it, those days, that's the gold standard now. Because we've lost control over that, you're not in control of your raw ingredients in the first place, so how are you going to standardise? Because they're all different. We all have different expectations of what an electrician is that comes to us. We never used to. We're talking about the loss of experience to the industry. You've got people like Balfour, Beatty on one side of the fence that do a fantastic job with apprentices, and you have the world's worst training providers on the other side of the fence that just harvest subsidies. Until we manage that, we're not going to tackle the issue, because the people that we deem competent now were trained in a way that delivered that competency, because it's a lot more restrictive, it was a lot more definitive, and it was a lot more common.
I'm just looking at the time. I think you've just encapsulated the challenge for the industry. And I feel like we've just come full circle, because that lack of standardisation is something that we recognise that we need to have better standards. Again, I'm talking from a training provider's perspective. We would love to be set, I was going to say raise a bar, but at least set a bar for what you, as a series of organisations, would like to see as and we'll call it, let's focus on high voltage operator training. What do you expect to receive if you pay a training provider to give you a high voltage operator course? What do you want that person to be able to have achieved as a series of learning outcomes before we give them back to you? And I think for me, that's what a number of these industry organisations are trying to do at the moment. Amir, I don't know if you're still here, but you talked about the G+. That initiative is trying to tackle that problem. I know Apito are trying to do the same thing. So we do need to tackle that problem head on. And I'm sure I'd love to hear whether other people have got some solutions to this dilemma.
I'll just say something, Lisa. So this particular session due to finish in around now, actually. But we left this topic towards the end of the day because it's a highly engaging topic. So we're going to keep it rolling for a little longer, if that's all right. I think it's important that we get the collaboration. Really appreciate this input that's coming from the audience, which is excellent. So our mic is roving on the floor. If anyone wants to particularly leave the room now because it's not applicable to them, feel free. But we're going to keep on rolling for probably another 10 minutes or so. Is that all right? Let's go.
Cool.
Sorry, Martin, did you have a question?
Yeah. It was a silly question, but how do you work with the global standards or corporate level standards and approach on the country level legislation? Because some countries like France, they have very clear requirements.
So Martin, I'm certainly not trying to suggest that I've got all the solutions here. What I'm trying to raise and I guess get people to talk to is we have a problem. We do not have enough electrical workers now. And at the moment, we're really good at poaching one another's skilled people, but we need to come up with some other solutions. So one of the solutions or contributions to the solution is to start talking about what is a minimum acceptable standard that you can recognise when you start acquiring people that is sustainable across multiple countries. Is that an achievable concept? And I'm suggesting that it is. I know that the French legislation is different to what we see in, let's pick on Germany and France. They are complex and they have very much their own idiosyncrasies. But I still maintain that there is a baseline of learning outcomes that are consistent across those countries?
We have noticed back in ABB related with the combination of product trainings and hands-on trainings. Like mostly in Europe, every country has got their own standards when it comes to electrical safety, and at the same time also, when we try to utilize a third party to do a senior authorized person training or anything like that, it doesn't really reflect to the product or a combination of product or a combination of process which they are working. So it is very essential to make sure that somebody from the inside organization as well as an external training company link together to understand the process of product, what they are working, so that in combination of the local standards as well as the company procedures and policies are getting incorporated. And this way, when we do the training also from the ABB perspective, we have find that the competence of the people are much more improved, and they understand the things in a better manner actually. But it's a huge challenge, and at a time we can only do few audience, right? We cannot do it. It takes a long time process actually. That's one of the challenges we face here.
So we've got a number of global companies here today. Be interesting to hear from other OEMs, for example. What are you doing when you are trying to train to a consistent standard to your electrical safety rules when you're operating at a global level? Mark.
That's not going to replace work on the transmission and the DNO system. That will clear boundaries to where it applies. But at that point, we've highlighted where the competence is useful for the industry and where we have a lack. You don't need to be a DNO SAP to operate single feed isolations on the transformer on a wind turbine. So there are differences. And we can set an agreed standard, and the desire is to be able to have that global. Yes, we may need to call it something different. Yes, we're going to have to review laws and regulations every time we go, but that should be a development process every time we go into a different country that we can do. So for offshore, onshore wind, there may be a structured way to standardise, but I 100% agree. We wouldn't look to then say the transmission system is now. Let's try and change everything that they've been doing for many, many years.
Can I ask a question in response to your comments, please? I agree with you partially. the opportunity in a standard set of skills. So if we're trying to get new electrical people into industries, which we have, turbine, light turbine, electric turbine, GE's turbine, the technology is all roughly the same in terms of the methodologies for the skill set.
Yeah.
Is that not where the trick lies, to get people into the industry and train them specifically for that industry? So if you think about car factories, if you think about processes like that, they don't necessarily follow the City and Guilds of this world. They train for their equipment and their methodologies. Is that where we should go as a business?
Yeah, and I think within the wind turbine safety rules, we need to look at standardising the training in line with standardising the process, because then it doesn't matter what, you can develop that training in any country that you go into. So, Germany you'll get the same, Netherlands you'll get the same, UK you'll get the same. Obviously, again, there's still laws and regulations that you have to capture, but the standardised approach to the process, the standardised comes a standardised approach to training.
Does that not take a little bit of courage? Is that the only thing that's stopping that?
100%. People need to be able to take the effort to look at how we're going to standardise these processes, and then also look to say, we have a standardised process, we have a standardised training, now we have to sell it. Now we have to get it out there and used. And it is the Siemens, the GEs, the Vestas of this world who are going to go out there first in these different countries and different locations. They're going to start the installation. If they bring that process with them, bring that training with them, then afterwards the operators follow suit, and then we're rolling.
What's the driver of that? Safety or commercial?
I think, 100 with standardised safety approach for first and foremost, standardised training. Commercially, if we can all share resources, if everybody's getting the same training, if everybody's at the same competence, technicians, companies can move all around the area and use those resources and know what they're getting.
The driver for it, from my perspective, is to narrow the gap between we've got now. So everyone's telling them inside out, looking for is it a 4-year apprenticeship, is it a 5-year apprenticeship, is it a 2-year apprenticeship. If we're willing to face the fact that these technicians are going to be working on wind turbines, then what is the issue in training them specifically on the technology that they're going to work for? In answer to that question, I would say that the driver is out of necessity, because we can't afford, for offshore wind at the moment, the graph is vertical. We don't stand a chance of getting new people into the industry quick enough unless we think about how we're going to train them. And if we can't afford to train them, and it isn't available to train them on a longer term, 2-3 year basis, then we need to train them on the specifics of the risks that we need them to be able to mitigate against. Don't waste in terms of safety and competence. Train for the task that you're going to be doing, and understand the risks that you're going to face when you're doing those tasks.
Thank you. I thought we were going to struggle for audience participation like that today, so this is excellent. But I'm conscious there's other industries apart from wind, but that was a really good piece of dialogue between the two of you. See some shaking heads, which I guess has also got a bit of collaboration. I could give the mic to shaking heads, they can have their opinion, but I didn't know, Lisa, if you wanted to grab all the conversation and just lead it forward. I probably didn't know if we touched on just some of the methodologies around VR, classroom-based, and just some of the different methods to training. We've covered standardisation. I don't know if you want to take to that. Mark?
Mark, would you like to?
Well, I mean, I've been interested in the discussion, obviously, but the solution, I think, will involve a broader range of issues than just the technologies and the tools. Again, the tools are only as good as the way in which they're used. So I think Mark was saying the sort of the standardised one-size-fits-all approach to training. I think that's going to be a problem. I think we might have universal standards for offshore LV wind eventually, but I think the approach to training will be a little bit different perhaps, but nevertheless yield the same outcomes in terms of the standards. So everyone will meet the same learning outcomes, but there might be different pathways to meet those outcomes. And that might solve some of the problems that, different people need. Not everyone needs a 4-year apprenticeship, I would imagine. I mean, people could achieve the same learning outcomes perhaps in 2 years with some good training strategies. my thoughts.
No, that's good, Mark. I really appreciate that. I think we're going to keep moving on now, if that's all right. Thank you very much to the panel for your input. And I'm sorry we're not answering every single question that's come up, but I appreciate the interaction.